Hello, all you lovely viewers out there on YouTube, and welcome to another A Memory of Light read-through by your one and only host, Calculator Ferret. Now, first of all, I want to apologize for the last video I made, because I was sick when I did it, and it was not of good quality, and I gotta apologize for that. So, for all of you who watched last video I made, yeah, it wasn't very good. I'll admit that. And also, to bring up another issue that one of the viewers commented on was that I kind of speak too fast. And I mean, after listening to the video, I can see where you get that from. So I'm going to try from now on be as slowly as I can. And of course, obviously, I'm going to make mistakes, but we all know that. I'm just going to try to, plow on through them. Alright then. Now, those things out of the way, let's get started on this part's reading. I'm starting on page 52, if anyone's reading along. So, here we go. Do we really need so many lamps in here? The Aes Sedai demanded from her stool at the back of the room. It might as well have been a throne. Think of the oil you're wasting. We need the lamps, Androl grunted. Night rain pelted the window, but he ignored it, trying to focus on the leather he was sewing. It would be a saddle. At the moment, he was working on the girth that would go around the horse's belly. He poked holes into the leather in a double row, letting the work calm him. The stitching chisel he used made diamond-shaped holes. He could use the mallet on them for speed if he wanted, but right now he liked the feel of pressing the holes without it. He picked up a stitch mark wheel, measuring out the locations for the next stitches, then worked another of the holes. You had to line the flat sides of the diamonds towards one another for holes like this, so that when the leather pulled, it didn't pull in the flats. The neat stitches would help keep the saddle in good shape over the years. The rows needed to be close enough together to reinforce one another, but not so close that they were in danger of that there was danger of them ripping to one another. Staggering the holes helped. Little things. You just had to make sure the little things were done right, and his fingers slipped, and he punched a hole with the diamond pointing the wrong way. Two of the holes ripped into one another at the motion. He nearly tossed the entire thing across the room in frustration. That was the fifth one tonight. Light, he thought, pressing his hands on the table. What's happened to my self-control? He could answer that question with ease, unfortunately. The Black Tower is what happened. He felt like a multi-legged Nachi trapped in a dried-up tidal pool, waiting desperately for the water to return, while watching a group of children work their way down the beach with buckets, gathering anything that looked tasty. He breathed in and out, then picked up the leather. This would be the shoddiest piece of work he'd done in years, but he would finish it. Leaving something unfinished was nearly as bad as messing up the details. Curious, said the Aes Sedai. Her name was Pevara, of the Red Ajay. He could feel her eyes on his back. A red. Well, common destinations made for unusual shipmates, as the old Tarian saying went. Perhaps he should use the Chaldean proverb instead. If his sword is at your enemy's throat, don't waste time remembering when it was at yours. So, Pevara said, you were telling me about your life prior to coming to the Black Tower? I don't believe that I was, Androl said, beginning to sew. Why? What do you want to know? I'm simply curious. Were you one of those who came here on his own, to be tested? Or were you one of those they found while out hunting? He pulled the thread tight. I came on my own, as I believe Evin told you yesterday when you asked him about me. She said. I'm being monitored, I see. He looked towards her, lowering the leather. Is that something they teach you? What? Pevara asked innocently. To twist a conversation about. There you sit, all but accusing me of spying on you, when you were the one interrogating my friends about me. I want to know what my resources are. You want to know why a man would choose to come to the Black Tower, to learn to channel the one power. She didn't answer. He could see her deciding upon a response that would not run afoul of the three oaths. Speaking of an ace a day was like trying to follow a green snake as it slipped through damp grass. Yes, she said. He blinked in surprise. Yes, I want to know, she continued. We are allies, whether either of us desires it or not. I want to know what kind of person I've slipped into bed with. She eyed him. Figuratively speaking, of course. He took a deep breath, forcing himself to become calm. He hated talking of Ace Today with them twisting everything about. That, mixed with the tension of the night and the inability to get the saddle right, he would be calm. Light burn him. We should practice making a circle, Pevara said. It will be an advantage to us, albeit a small one, against tamed men, should they come for us. Androl put his dislike of the woman from his mind. He had other things to worry about, and forced himself to think objectively. A circle? Do you know what one is? Afraid not. She pursed her lips. Sometimes I forget how ignorant all you are. She paused, as if realizing she said too much. All men are ignorant, Ace Sedai, Androl said. The topics of our ignorance may change, but the nature of the world is that no man may know everything. That didn't seem to be the answer she'd been expecting either. Those hard eyes studied him. She didn't like men who could channel. Most people didn't. But with her, it was more. She had spent her life hunting down men like Androl. A circle, Pevara said, is created when women and men join their strength into one power together. It must be done in a specific way. The Mahayal will know about it then. Men require women to form a circle, Pevara said. In fact, a circle must contain more women than men, except in a very limited case. One woman and man can link, as can one woman and two men, as can two women and two men. So the largest we could create is a circle of 3, with me and 2 of you. Still, it could be of use to us. I'll find you 2 of the others to practice with, Androl said. Among those I trust, I'd say that Nelam is the strongest. Emerin is very powerful too, and I don't think he's yet reached the height of his strength. Same for Jonathan. They are the strongest? Pevara asked. Not yourself? No, he said, returning to his work. That rain picked up again outside, and chill air slipped under the door. One of the room's lamps was burning low nearby, letting shadows into the room. He watched the darkness uncomfortably. I find that hard to believe, Master Androl, she said. They all look up to you. Believe what you wish, Ace Sedai. I'm weakest among them. Perhaps the weakest man in the Black Tower. This quieted her, and Androl rose to refill that dwindling lamp. As he sat back down, a rap on the door announced the entrance of Emerin and Cannelier. Although both were wet from the rain, they were nearly as opposite as men could be. One was tall, refined, and careful, the other crotchety and prone to gossip. They had found common ground, though, somewhere, and seemed to enjoy one another's company. Well, Androl asked. It might work, Emerin said, taking off his rain-soaked coat and hanging it on a hook beside the door. He wore clothing underneath, embroidered after the Tarian style. It would need to be a powerful rainstorm. The guards watched carefully. I feel like the prize bull at a fair, Cannelier grumbled, stomping some of the mud off his boots after hanging up his coat. Everywhere we go, Tame's favored watches from the corners of their eyes. Blood and ashes, Androl. They know. They know we're going to try running. Did you find any weak spots? Pevara asked, leaning forward. Some place where the walls were less guarded? It appears to depend upon the guards chosen, Pevara Sedai, Emerin said, nodding to her. I suppose that it would. Have I mentioned how intriguing it is that I find that one of you who treats me with the most respect is a Tyrian? Being polite to a person is not a sign of respect for them, Pevara Sedai, Emerin said. It is merely a sign of a good upbringing and a balanced nature. Androl smiled. Emerin was an absolute wonder with insults. Half the time, people didn't figure that he'd been mocked until they'd parted ways. Pevara's mouth pursed. Well then, we watch the rotation of guards. When the next storm arrives, We will use it as cover and escape for the walls under the guards we think are less observant. The two men turned to Androl, who caught himself watching the corner of the room where the shadow fell from a table. Was it growing larger? Reaching towards him. I don't like leaving men behind, he said, forcing himself to look away from the corner. There are dozens upon dozens of men and boys here who aren't yet under Taim's control. We can't possibly lead all of them out without drawing attention. If we leave them, we risk... He couldn't say it. They didn't know what was happening. Not really. People were changing. Once trustworthy allies became enemies overnight. They looked like the same people, yet different at the same time. Different behind the eyes. Androl shivered. The women sent by the rebel Aes Sedai are still outside the gate, Pevara said. They've been camped out there for a while, claiming the Dragon Reborn had promised them warders. Taim had yet to let any of them in. If we can reach them, we can storm the tower and rescue those left behind. Will it really be that easy? Emran asked. Taim will have an entire village of hostages. A lot of the men brought their families. Candelier nodded. His family was one of them. He wouldn't willingly leave them. Beyond that, Androl said softly, turning on his stool to face Pevara, do you honestly think the Aes Sedai can win here? Many of them have decades, some centuries of experience. How much of that was spent fighting? Pevara did not answer. There are hundreds of men who can channel in here, Aes Sedai, Androl continued. Each one has been trained, at length, to be a weapon. We don't learn about politics or history. We don't study how to influence nations. We learn to kill. Every man and boy here is pushed to the edge of his capacity, forced to stretch and grow, gain more power, destroy. And a lot of them are insane. Can your Aes Sedai fight that? Particularly when many of the men we trust, the merry men we're trying to save, will likely fight alongside Taim's men if they see the Aes Sedai trying to invade? Your arguments are not without merit, Pevara said. Just like a queen, he thought, unwillingly and pressed to her pose. But surely we need to send information out, Pevara continued. An all-out assault may be unwise, but sitting here until we are all taken, one by one... I do believe it would be wise to send someone, Emran said. We need to warn the Lord Dragon. The Lord Dragon, Candelier said with a snort, taking a seat by the wall. He's abandoned us, Emran. We're nothing to him. The Dragon Reborn carries the world on his shoulders, Candelier, Androl said softly, catching Candelier up short. I don't know why he's left us here, but I prefer to assume it's because he thinks we can handle it ourselves. Androl fingered the straps of leather, then stood up. This is our time of proving, the test of the Black Tower. If we have to run to the Aes Sedai to protect us from our own, we subject ourselves to their authority. If we have to run to the Lord Dragon, then we will be nothing once he is gone. There can be no reconciliations of Tam now, Emran said. We all know what he is doing. Androl didn't look at Pevara. She had explained what she suspected was happening, and she, despite years of training at keeping her emotions in check, had not been able to quiet the fear in her voice as she spoke of it. 13 Murdril and 13 Channelers, together in a horrifying rite, could turn any Channeler to the shadow, against his will. What he is doing is pure, undilated evil, Pevara said. This is no longer a division between the men who follow our leader and those who follow another. This is the Dark One's work, Androl. The Black Tower has fallen under the shadow. You must accept that. The Black Tower is a dream, he said, meeting her eyes. A shelter for men who can channel, a place of our own, where men need not fear, or run, or be hated. I will not surrender that to Taim. I will not. The room fell silent save for the sounds of rain in the window. Emran began to nod, and Candelier stood up, taking Androl by the arm. You're right, Candelier said. Burn me if you ain't right, Androl. But what can we do? We're weak, outnumbered. Emran, Androl said, did you ever hear about the Nox Rebellion? Indeed, it caused quite a stir even outside of Merndy. Bloody Mirandians, Candler spat. They'll steal your coat off your back and beat you bloody if you don't offer your shoes, too. Emran raised an eyebrow. Nox was well outside Londraed, Candler, Androl said. I think you'd find the people there not dissimilar to Andorians. The rebellion happened about, 10 years back now. A group of farmers overthrew their lord, Emran said. He deserved it, by all accounts. Desartan was a horrid man, particularly to those beneath him. He had a force of soldiers, one of the largest outside of Londraed, and was looking as if he'd set up his own little kingdom. There wasn't a thing the king could do about it. And Desartan was overthrown? Candler asked. By simple men and women who had too much of his brutality, Androl said. In the end, many of the mercenaries who had been his cronies stood with us. Though he'd seemed so strong, his rotten core led to his downfall. It seems bad here, but most of Taim's men are not loyal to him. Men like him don't inspire loyalty. They collect cronies, others who hope to share in the wealth or power. We can, and we will, find a way to overthrow him. The others nodded, though Pevara simply watched him with pursed lips. Androl couldn't help feeling a bit of a fool. He didn't think the others should be looking up to him, instead of someone distinguished like Emran or someone powerful like Nalam. From the corner of his eyes, he saw the shadows underneath the table lengthen, reaching for him. He set his jaw. They wouldn't dare take him with so many people around, would they? If the shadows were going to consume him, they'd wait until he was alone, trying to sleep. Nights terrified him. They're coming when I don't hold the Satan now, he thought. Burn me, the source was cleansed. I'm not supposed to be losing any more of my wits. He gripped the seat of his stool until the terror retreated, the darkness withdrawing. Candler, looking uncharacteristically cheerful, said he was going to fetch them something to drink. He wandered towards the kitchen, but nobody was to go out alone, so he hesitated. I suppose I could use a drink as well, Pevara said with a sigh, joining him. Androl sat down to continue his work. As he did, Emran pulled over a stool, settling down beside him. He did so nonchalantly, as if merely looking for a good place to relax and wanting a view out the window. Emran, however, wasn't the type to do things without several motivations. You fought in the Nox Rebellion, Emran said softly. Did I say that? Androl resumed his work in the leather. You said that when the mercenaries switched sides, they fought with you. You used the word us to refer to the rebels. Androl hesitated. Burn me, I really need to watch myself. If Emran had noticed, Pevara would have as well. I was just passing through, Androl said, and was caught up in something unanticipated. You have a strange and varied past, my friend, Emran said. The more I hear of it, the more curious I become. I wouldn't say that I'm the only one of an interesting past, Androl said softly. Lord Algarian of House Pendalin. Emran pulled back, eyes widening. How did you know? Fanchir had a book of Tarian noble lines. Fanchir had a book of Tarian noble lines, Androl said, mentioning one of the Ashman soldiers who had been a scholar before coming to the tower. It includes a curious notation. A house troubled by a history of men with an unmentionable problem. A house troubled by a history of men of an unmentionable problem. The most recent one having shamed the house not a few dozen years ago. I see. Well, I suppose that is not too much of a surprise that I am a nobleman. One who has experience of Aes Sedai, Androl continued, and who treats him with respect despite, or because of, what they did for his family. A Tarian nobleman who does this, mind you. One who does not mind serving beneath what you would term farm boys, and who sympathizes with citizen rebels. If I might say, my friend, that is not a prevalent attitude among your countrymen. I wouldn't hesitate to guess you've had an interesting past of your own. Emran smiled. Point conceded. He would be wonderful at the game of houses, Androl. I wouldn't say that, Androl said with a grimace. Last time I tried my hand at it, I almost... He stopped. What? I'd rather not say, Androl said, face flushing. He was not going to explain that period of his life. Light, people will think I'm as much a tail spinner as an lamb if I continue like this. Amarin turned to watch the rain hitting the window. The Nox rebellion succeeded for only a short time, if I remember correctly. Within 2 years, the noble line had re-established itself, and the dissenters were driven out or executed. Yes, Androl said softly. So we do a better job of it here, Amarin said. I'm your man, Androl. We all are. No, Androl said. We are the Black Tower's men. I'll lead you if I must, but this isn't about me, or about you, or any of us individually. I am only in charge until Logain returns. If he ever returns, Androl thought. Gateways into the Black Tower don't work any longer. Is he trying to return? But finds himself locked out? Very well, Amarin said. What do we do? Thunder crashed outside. Let me think, Androl said, picking up a piece of leather and his tools. Give me 1 hour. I'm sorry, Jessalyn said softly, kneeling beside Talmanes. There is nothing I can do. This wound is too far along for my skill. Talmanes nodded, replacing the bandage. The skin all along his side had turned black, as if from a terrible frostbite. The kinswoman frowned at him. She was a youthful-looking woman with golden hair, though with Chandler's, age could be very deceptive. I'm amazed you can still walk. I'm not certain it could be defined as walking, Talmanes said, limping back towards the soldiers. He could still gimp along on his own, mostly, but the dizzy moments came more frequently now. Guybon was arguing with Dennel, who kept pointing at his map and gesturing. There was such a haze of smoke in the air that many of the men had tied kerchiefs to their faces. They looked like a band of bloody ale. Even the Trollocks are pulling out of that corridor, Guybon insisted. There's too much fire. The Trollocks are pulling back into the walls all throughout the city, Dennel replied. They're going to let the city burn all night. The only sector not burning is the one where the Waygate is. They knocked down all the buildings there to create a firewall. They used the one power, Jessamine said from behind Talmanes. I felt it. Black Sisters. I would not suggest going in that direction. Jessamine was the only kinswoman remaining. The other had fallen. Jessamine wasn't powerful enough to create a gateway, but neither was she useless. Talmanes had watched her burn 6 Trollocks that had broken through his lines. He'd spent that skirmish sitting back, overcome by the pain. Fortunately, Jessamine had given him some herbs to chew. They made his head feel fuzzier, but made the pain manageable. It felt as if his body were in a vice, being smashed slowly, but at least he could still stay on his feet. We take the quickest route, Talmanes said. The quarter that isn't burning is too close to the dragons. I won't risk the Shadow Spawn discovering Eludra and her weapons. Assuming they haven't already. Guybon glared at him, but this was the band's operation. Guybon was welcome, but he wasn't part of the command structure. Talmanes' force continued through the dark city, wary of ambushes. Though they knew the approximate location of the warehouse, getting there was problematic. Many large streets were blocked by wreckage, fire, or the enemy. His forces had to crawl through alleyways and lanes so twisted that even Guybon and others from Camlin had difficulty following their intended direction. The path skirted portions of the city that burned with a heat so strong it was probably melting cobblestones. Talmanes stared at those flames until his eyes felt dry, then led his men in further detours. Inch by inch they approached Eludra's warehouse. Twice they encountered Trollocks prowling for refugees to kill. They finished these off, the remaining crossbowmen felling over half of each group before they had time to respond. Talmanes stood to watch, but did not trust himself to fight any longer. That wound had left him too weak. Light. Why had he left his horse behind? Fool move, that. Well, the Trollocks would have chased it off anyways. My thoughts are starting to go in circles. He pointed his sword down a crossing alley. The scouts scurried on ahead and looked in both directions before giving the all clear. I can barely think. Not much longer now before the darkness takes me. He would see the dragons protected first. He had to. Talmanes stumbled out of the alley into a familiar street. They were close. On one side of the street, structures burned. The statues there looked like poor souls trapped in the flames. The fires raged around them, and their white marble was slowly being overcome by black. The other side of the street was silent. Nothing there burning. Shadows thrown by the shadows danced and played, like revelers watching their enemies burn. The air smelled oppressively of smoke. Those shadows, and the burning statues, seemed to move to Talmanes' fuzzy mind. Dancing creatures of shadow, dying beauties consumed by a sickness upon the skin, darkening it, feasting on it, killing the soul. "We're close now," Talmanes said. He pushed himself forward into a shambling run. He couldn't afford to slow them down. If that fire reaches the warehouse... They arrived at a burned-out patch of ground. The fire had been there and gone, apparently. A large wooden warehouse had stood there once, but it had fallen now. Now the timbers only smoldered, and were a heap of rubble and half-burned Trolloc corpses. The men gathered around silent. The men gathered around him, silent. The only sound was that of crackling flames. Cold sweat dripped down Talmanes' face. "We were too late," Melten whispered. "They took them, didn't they? The dragons would have made explosions if they burned. The shadow spawn arrived, took the dragons, and burned the place down." Around Talmanes, exhausted members of the band sank down to their knees. "I'm sorry, Matt," Talmanes thought. "We tried. A sudden sound like thunder cracked through the city. It shook Talmanes to his bones, and the men looked up. "Light," Guybon said. "The shadow spawn are using the dragons?" "Maybe not," Talmanes said. Strength surged through him, and he broke into a run again. His men filled in around him. Each footfall sent a jolt of agony up his side. He passed down the street with the statues, flames to his right, cold stillness to his left. Boom! Those explosions didn't sound loud enough to be dragons. Dared he hope for an ace a day? Jessamine seemed to have perked up at the sounds, and was running in her skirts alongside the men. The group barreled around a corner 2 streets from the warehouse and came up on the back ranks of a snarling force of shadow spawn. Talmanes bellowed with a startling ferocity and raised his sword in 2 hands. The fire of his wound had spread through his entire body. Even his fingers burned of it. He felt as if he'd become one of the statues, consigned to burn with the city. He beheaded a Trolloc before it knew he was there, then threw himself at the next creature in line. It drew back with an almost liquid grace, turning a face on him that had no eyes, a cloak that did not stir in the wind. Pale lips drew back in a snarl. Talmanes found himself laughing. Why not? And men said he didn't have any sense of humor. Talmanes moved into apple blossoms in the wind, striking forward wildly with strength and fury to match the fire that was killing him. The Murdril obviously had him at a disadvantage. At his best, Talmanes would have needed help fighting one. The thing moved like a shadow, flowing from one form to the next, its terrible blade darting towards Talmanes. It obviously felt it only needed to nick him. It scored a hit in his cheek, the tip of its sword catching in his skin there and slicing a neat ribbon through the flesh. Talmanes laughed and struck at the weapon with his sword, causing the Fade's mouth to open wide in surprise. That wasn't how men were supposed to react. They were supposed to stumble at the burning flare of pain, cry out as they knew their lives had ended. "I've already had one of your flaming swords in me, you son of a goat!" Talmanes screamed, attacking time and time again. Blacksmith strikes the blade. Such an inelegant form. It fit his move perfectly. The Murdril stumbled. Talmanes swept back in a smooth motion, bringing his sword to the side and slicing the thing's pale white arm free at the elbow. The limb twisted in the air, the Fade's blade dropping from spasming fingers. Talmanes spun for momentum and brought his sword across with 2 hands, severing the Fade's head from its neck. Dark blood sprayed free, and the thing fell, its remaining hand clawing at the bloodied stump as it collapsed. Talmanes stood over it, his sword suddenly feeling too heavy to hold. It slipped from his fingers, clinging to the It slipped from his fingers, clanging to the paving stones. He tipped and fell... oh my gosh! He tipped and lost his balance, falling face first, but a hand caught him from behind. Light! Melten exclaimed, looking at the body. Another one? I found the secret to defeating them, Talmanes whispered. You just have to be dead already. He chuckled to himself, though Melten just looked at him, seeming baffled. Around them, dozens of Trollocs collapsed to the ground, writhing. They'd been linked to the Fade. The band gathered around Talmanes, some bearing wounds, a few were down for good. They were exhausted and worn down. This batch of Trollocs could have ended them. Melten retrieved Talmanes' sword and swabbed it clean, but Talmanes found he was having trouble standing, so he sheathed it and had a man fetch a Trolloc spear for him to lean on. Ho! The back of the street! A distant voice called. Whoever you are, thank you! Talmanes limped forward, Filger and Mar scouting on ahead. Talmanes limped forward, Filger and Mar scouting on ahead without needing orders. The street here was dark and cluttered of Trollocs that had fallen moments ago, so it was a moment before Talmanes could climb over the corpses and see who had called to him. Someone had built a barricade at the end of the street. People stood atop it, including one who had held aloft. People stood atop it, including one who had held aloft a torch. She had hair in braids and wore a plain brown dress with a white apron. It was Aludra. Chthon soldiers. Excuse me. Chthon soldiers, Aludra said, seeming unimpressed. Your time, you certainly do take it coming for me. Well, let me say that over again. Your time, you certainly did take it coming for me. Okay, sorry, but I'm gonna have to say that again because it didn't sound right. Anyway, sorry. Your time, you certainly did take it coming for me. In one hand, she held a stubby leather cylinder larger than a man's fist, with a short length of dark fuse attached. Talmanes knew they exploded after she lit and threw them. The band had used them before, hurling them from slings. They weren't as devastating as dragons, but still powerful. Aludra, Talmanes called. You have the dragons? Please tell me you saved them. She sniffed, waving for some people to pull apart a side of the barricade to admit his men. She appeared to have several hundred, maybe several thousand townspeople back there, filling the street. As they opened the way for him, he saw a beautiful sight. Surrounded by townspeople, 100 dragons rested there. The bronze tubes had been fitted to wooden dragon carts to comprise a single unit, pulled by 2 horses. They were really quite maneuverable, all things considered. Those carts could be anchored in the ground to manage recoil, Talmanes knew, and the dragons fired once the horses were detached. There were more than enough people here to do the work horses should have been available to do. Do you think I would leave them? Aludra asked. This lot, they do not have the training to fire them, but they can pull a cart as well as anyone else. We have to get them out, Talmanes said. It is a new revelation to you? Aludra asked. As if I hadn't been trying to do that same thing. Your face, what is wrong with it? I once ate a rather sharp cheese, and it has never quite sat right with me. Aludra cocked her head at him. Maybe if I smiled more when I made jokes, he thought idly, leaning against the side of the barricade, then they'd understand what I meant. That, of course, raised the question, did he want people to understand? It was often more amusing the other way. Besides, smiling was so garish. Where was the subtlety? And he really was having trouble focusing. He blinked at Aludra, whose face had grown concerned in the torchlight. What about my face? Talmanes raised a hand to his cheek. Blood. Myrtle. Right. Just a cut. And the veins? Veins? He asked, then noticed his hand. Tendrils of blackness, like ivy growing beneath his skin, had wound down his wrist and across the back of his hand towards the fingers. They seemed to be growing darker as he watched. Oh, that. Well, I'm dying, unfortunately. Terribly tragic. You wouldn't happen to have any brandy, would you? My lord, a voice called. Talmanes blinked, then forced himself to turn about, leaning on the spear. Yes, Filger? More Trollocs, my lord. Lots of them. They're filing in behind us. Lovely. Lovely. Set the table. I hope we have enough dinnerware. I knew we should have I knew we should have sent the maid for that 5,731st set. Are you feeling all right? Are you feeling all right? Aludra asked. Blood and bloody ashes, woman. Do I look like I'm feeling well? Guybon, retreat is cut off. How far from the east gates are we? East gates? Guybon called. Maybe a half-hour march. We need to head further down the hill. Onward we go then, Talmanes said. Take the scouts and go on point. Then I'll make sure these local folks are organized to haul those dragons. Be ready to set up the weapons. Talmanes, Aludra said, stepping in. Dragon's eggs and powder. We have few of them left. We will need the suppliers from Barelon. Today, if you have set up the dragons, a few shots for each dragon. That is all I can give you. Dennel nodded. Dragons aren't meant to make up frontline units all by themselves, my lord. They need support to keep the enemies from coming too close and destroying the weapons. We can man those dragons, but we won't last long without infantry. That's why I'm running, Talmanes said. He turned, took a step, and was so woozy he almost fell. And I believe I'll need a horse.